The autumn wind rattled the mercantile windows. Sarah stood at the counter, 3 pairs of eyes watching from behind her skirts. Her hands trembled as she placed 2 coins on the worn wood. "I need flour and salt on credit, Mr. Hastings." "I can pay half now, the rest after harvest." The storekeeper crossed his arms. His voice carried to every corner of the shop. "No charity for women who can't keep a husband. Town's got standards." Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathered crowd. Sarah felt her sons press closer to her legs. Daniel, 10 years old, stood rigid. Ben, 7, stared at his boots. Timmy, just 4, clutched her skirt with both hands. "Please," Sarah said quietly. "My boys need to eat. Maybe if you'd been a proper wife, he wouldn't have left." Hastings turned his back. "Now move along." Sarah's face burned. She gathered her sons and walked toward the door. Each step felt like dragging stones. Behind her, a woman whispered loud enough to hear, "Shameless creature." Timmy looked up, his voice small and breaking. "Mama, are we bad?" Sarah couldn't answer. She pushed through the door into the gray afternoon. Across the street, a man leaned against a post. Jackson had watched the whole scene. His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists. He didn't move, not yet. But something in the widow's straight spine, in the way she held her head high despite humiliation, pierced through 3 years of numbness. He'd been dead inside since the winter that took his wife and daughter. This woman, walking through shame with dignity, reminded him what courage looked like. He pushed off the post. His decision was made before he fully understood it. That night, Jackson sat his horse on the ridge above Sarah's claim. Moonlight painted the scene in silver and shadow. The widow chopped wood like a woman who'd never held an axe. Her boys huddled by a smoking fire pit. No proper chimney, winter coming fast. The lean-to they called shelter wouldn't survive the first real storm. Jackson watched Daniel try to help his mother, the boy's thin arms shaking. Ben kept Timmy close, sharing body heat. The youngest cried softly, probably hungry. Memories flooded Jackson's mind, his wife's face, his daughter's laugh. The storm 3 years ago that trapped them while he was away working, when he'd returned. They were both gone, fever and cold taking what the storm had started. Not again. He turned his horse toward town. The mercantile was closed, but Jackson knew where Hastings kept his spare key. He left money on the counter more than the supplies were worth. He loaded flour, salt, dried meat, nails, and canvas into sacks. Before dawn, he rode back to Sarah's claim. He placed everything on the crude doorstep. No note, no name carved. When the sun rose, Sarah emerged to gather kindling. She stopped, stared at the supplies. Her hand went to her mouth. Suspicion and hope warred in her eyes. "Boys," she called. "Come see." They rushed out, faces lighting up at the sight of food. Ben touched the flour sack like it might vanish. Daniel's expression hardened with distrust. Timmy just grinned. "Who brought this?" "Mama," Ben asked. "I don't know," Sarah said slowly, "but we'll earn it back somehow." That evening, a traveler stopped by a circuit preacher heading south. "Storm's coming," he warned. "Worst blizzard in years, maybe 2 days out. Get to town if you can." Sarah looked at her lean-to, then at the darkening sky. She had nowhere to go. No one would take them in. At dusk, hoofbeats approached. Sarah tensed, pulled her boys behind her. Jackson dismounted, removed his hat. "Storm's coming, ma'am," he said. "You need help." Sarah studied him, the weathered face, the kind eyes, the quiet strength. "Why?" "Because it's the right thing to do." She hesitated only a moment. "Then I accept." The storm hit that night like the world ending. Jackson worked fast, boarding up walls, reinforcing the roof with the canvas he'd left. Wind howled. Snow came sideways, blinding and bitter. Inside the cramped lean-to, Sarah kept the boys calm while Jackson hammered and tied. By midnight, they were sealed in. The single lantern cast flickering shadows. The space was tight, barely room for 5 people, but it was warm, and it was holding. Daniel watched Jackson's every move, silent and measuring. Ben tried to help where he could, handing tools. Timmy, exhausted from fear, eventually curled up against Jackson's leg and fell asleep. Jackson froze. He stared at the boy's tangled hair, the small hand clutching his knee. Something cracked in his chest, something he'd kept locked for 3 years. Sarah saw it. "You have children." Jackson's voice came rough. "Had a daughter. She'd be about his age now." "Or what happened?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, winter storm. "I was working 2 towns over. My wife tried to get them to the doctor. Fever took them both before I got back." Sarah's hand stilled on the mending she was doing. "I'm sorry. I chose money over being there." Jackson's jaw tightened. "That's something I'll carry till I die." "Is that why you're helping us?" Jackson met her eyes. "Because I didn't help someone once, and I've been dying ever since." The storm raged for 3 days. They survived on the supplies Jackson had brought, rationing carefully. Daniel asked questions about carpentry. Ben told jokes that surprised Jackson into rare smiles. Timmy climbed into Jackson's lap like he belonged there. Sarah watched this broken man come slowly back to life around her children. She saw his gentleness, his patience, his silent competence. When his hand brushed hers reaching for the water bucket, neither pulled away quickly. On the 4th day, the storm broke. Pale sunlight filtered through gaps in the canvas. Jackson stepped outside to survey the damage in the land. Sarah followed, leaving the boys inside to warm themselves by the fire. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Help me build a real cabin before the next storm. I can't pay much, but I'll stay." She blinked. Just like that. Just like that. Jackson walked the property line, already planning the foundation. Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart doing something it hadn't done in 2 years it hoped. She whispered to herself, half prayer, half wonder. Maybe God sent him. 3 weeks passed in the rhythm of honest labor. Jackson and Daniel felled trees, the boy learning to swing the axe with proper form. Ben hauled water from the creek, his thin arms growing stronger. Timmy collected kindling, proud of his contribution. Sarah cooked, mended, and organized the supplies Jackson continued to quietly replenish. The cabin's frame rose log by log. 4 walls now, notched and fitted. The roof was half done. Each evening, they ate together by firelight, simple meals that tasted like feasts. Daniel's hands bled from the axe handle, but he didn't complain. Jackson showed him how to wrap them with cloth, his instruction patient and wordless. The boy was learning more than carpentry. He was learning what a man looked like when he kept his promises. One afternoon, Jackson strung a rope swing from a sturdy oak. Timmy squealed with delight. Ben pushed him higher, and even Daniel cracked a smile. Sarah watched from the cabin, her needle pausing mid-stitch. When had her heart felt this light that evening? Ben grinned across the fire. "Jackson, you ever get scared of anything?" Jackson thought before answering. "Yeah? Failing people who trust me?" The boy nodded like that made perfect sense. But not everyone was happy about the widow's improving circumstances. In town, land speculator Cyrus Mercer sat in the saloon, nursing whiskey and resentment. That land was supposed to be his prime grazing acreage. The widow had no legal claim filed. He'd made sure of that with a few well-placed bribes. Now some drifter cowboy was building her a cabin, making her look legitimate, making it harder to push her off. Mercer rode out to survey the situation himself. He tipped his hat to Sarah with cold courtesy, his eyes calculating. "Nice work you're doing here." Jackson stepped between them, silent, steady. His hand rested near his gun, Not threatening, just present. Mercer smiled thinly. Just being neighborly. He rode off, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. That night, Jackson checked the tree line. Wolf tracks circled the property, or maybe something worse than wolves. Trouble? Sarah asked. Maybe. Keep the boys close. She nodded, trusting him completely. That trust was starting to feel like the most precious thing Jackson had ever been given. The first real snow fell in late November, soft, heavy flakes that muffled sound and turned the world white. Jackson worked late, fitting the last roof beams. Sarah stayed with him, handing up tools, holding the lantern. The boys slept inside, bundled in blankets. The cabin was still open to the sky in places, but it was taking shape. It was becoming real. By firelight. Sarah watched Jackson carve a small wooden horse for Timmy. His hands moved with surprising delicacy. You're good at that, she said. My father taught me. Said a man should know how to make things, not just break them. Your father sounds like a good man. He was... Jackson sanded the horse's mane smooth. He'd have liked you. Sarah's needle paused. Why do you say that? Because you're strong in the ways that matter. Not loud about it. Just true. Her throat tightened. The town doesn't think I'm strong. They think I'm shameful. Jackson set down the carving. Tell me what happened, if you want to. So she did. The words came slowly at first. Then faster, her husband's gambling. His debts. His disappearance one night without a word. How the town blamed her. How they said she'd driven him away with her demands. Her nagging. Her failure as a wife. I wasn't perfect, Sarah said quietly. But I tried. I loved him. And he left us anyway. That's on him, not you. You say that, but the church ladies don't. The shopkeepers don't. In their eyes, I'm a woman who couldn't keep her man. That makes me dangerous. Or pathetic. Maybe both. Jackson leaned forward, his voice firm. You're neither. You're a mother fighting for her children. There's no shame in that. Sarah looked at him. Really looked at the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard. The way he held himself like a man carrying weight but refusing to fall. Her hand moved toward his, and this time when they touched, neither pulled away. The moment stretched. Firelight danced. Outside, snow fell soft and silent. Then Jackson cleared his throat and stood. Getting late. You should rest. Sarah nodded, though part of her wanted to protest. They were both afraid of wanting, of losing, of hoping for something that might not last. But the next morning brought a different kind of fear. 3 men rode onto the property, dressed too fine for honest work. They claimed to be surveyors for the Territorial Land Office. Their eyes were cold. Their smiles were threats. This land's disputed, ma'am. The leader said, Best you clear out before there's trouble. Jackson stepped out of the cabin, rifle held loose but ready. She's not going anywhere. You her husband. I'm the man telling you to leave. The surveyors exchanged glances. One reached for his gun. Jackson didn't move. But something in his stillness made the man reconsider. Mercer's going to hear about this, the leader spat. They rode off, but the threat hung heavy. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He found Jackson checking the perimeter and walked beside him in silence before finally speaking. Are you going to leave like Pa did? Jackson stopped. He wanted to promise he'd stay forever. But he'd learned that promises could break through no fault of your own storms came. Fever struck. Life betrayed you when you least expected. I'll stay till you're safe, he said. Daniel heard the hedge in those words. His jaw set. That's not a real answer. No, Jackson thought. It wasn't. Jackson rode into Coldwater at dawn, determined to file Sarah's claim properly and legally. No more room for Mercer's schemes. The land office clerk barely looked up from his ledger. Jackson explained the situation. produced the claim papers Sarah had filled out months ago. The clerk smirked. Don't see any claim filed under that name. Cowboy. I'm holding the copy right here. Then she must have forgot to file the original. Not my problem. Jackson leaned over the desk. How much did Mercer pay you? The clerk's face went red. You accusing me of... Yeah, I am... The door opened. Mercer himself walked in, flanked by 2 hired guns. Problem here, Jackson. You bribed him, destroyed her claim. Mercer adjusted his cufflinks. Casual as Sunday. That's a serious accusation. You got proof. Jackson didn't, and they both knew it. Here's how this is going to work. Mercer continued. The widow leaves peacefully. I'll pay her for improvements. She stays. Things get complicated. Legal. Ugly. She's not leaving. Mercer's smile turned cold. Then neither are you. See, the town council's been discussing your arrangement. Unmarried man, vulnerable woman, 3 children. Looks improper. Sheriff might have questions about moral conduct. It was a trap. Fight back legally, and they'd destroy Sarah's reputation completely. Stay and build, and they'd weaponize her decency against her. Jackson left the land office feeling the ground shift under his feet. He found Sarah at the mercantile, trying again to buy supplies. She'd brought eggs to trade. But before she could speak, 3 church ladies surrounded her like crows. Jezebel! One hissed. Living in sin with that drifter. I'm doing no such thing, Sarah said, voice shaking. He's helping us survive. You're making a mockery of decent womanhood. Daniel pushed forward, his young face furious. Leave my mother alone. One of the women shoved him back. Learn respect, boy. That's when Jackson arrived. He moved between Sarah and the crowd, his presence filling the space. His voice came low and lethal. You call yourselves Christian. You'd let a woman and children freeze rather than show mercy. The crowd went silent. The sheriff appeared weak-chinned, nervous. Now, Jackson, let's keep things peaceful. Peaceful. Jackson's laugh was bitter. Your town's been waging war on this woman since her husband left. And you've done nothing. I'm warning you, the sheriff said, voice reedy. Leave town or face charges. Sarah grabbed Jackson's arm. Please, just go. I won't drag you down with me. Jackson looked at her at the fear in her eyes, the shame she didn't deserve. The exhaustion of fighting alone. He wanted to roar, to fight, to tear down the hypocrisy. But she was asking him to leave, to save himself. So he did. That night, Jackson rode away from the unfinished cabin. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into darkness. Tears froze on her cheeks. Behind her, the boys were silent. Daniel's voice came flat. I knew he'd leave. The half-hung door swung in the wind, creaking, incomplete, broken. 2 weeks crawled by like winter itself had turned cruel. Sarah tried to continue building alone. Her hands bled from the saw. The logs were too heavy to lift without help. The roof remained unfinished, snow piling in the gaps. Food ran low. The boys grew quieter each day, the light fading from their eyes. Mercer's men returned. This time their message was clear. You got 3 days, then we're clearing this claim. Sarah held her sons close that night. She'd fought so hard, but she was losing. Daniel watched his mother's shoulders shake with silent sobs. He whispered to Ben, we don't need a man who leaves. Ben, ever hopeful, said nothing. Timmy just asked, is Pa coming back? Sarah couldn't answer. Maybe they didn't deserve someone who stayed. 40 miles away, Jackson worked at a neighboring ranch, mending fences. The rancher was kind, the pay fair. But Jackson moved through the days hollow-eyed and mechanical. At night, he heard echoes Timmy's laugh, Ben's questions, Daniel's serious voice. Sarah's quiet humming. He'd convinced himself leaving was the right thing, that staying would destroy her further, that he was protecting them by going. But the wound in his chest was bleeding again, the same wound that opened when his wife and daughter died. He'd thought helping Sarah would heal it. Instead, leaving had torn it wider. On the 15th day, a cowhand rode in with news from Coldwater. Heard Mercer's planning something nasty. Gonna burn that widow's cabin. Claims she abandoned it. Tomorrow night, Jackson's world stopped. Then it started again, faster, hotter, with absolute clarity. He saddled his horse without a word, riding out into a gathering storm. Before he left, he stopped at his wife's grave, a simple cross he'd carved 3 years ago. "I can't save you," he said aloud. "I'll never stop missing you. But those boys need a father. That woman needs someone to stand with her. Tell me that's enough. Tell me I'm allowed to live again." The wind answered with silence, but in that silence, Jackson felt something release, not forgetting. Not replacing, just permission. He rode through the blizzard at full gallop, his horse's breath clouding the frozen air. A man no longer fleeing his past, but racing toward his future. Sarah saw the torchlight first. 4 riders, moving through the trees toward the cabin. She knew what they'd come to do. She grabbed her boys, whispered urgently, "Into the woods! Run!" They fled into the darkness, snow soaking through their clothes. Behind them, flames began to lick at the cabin roof. Mercer's laughter echoed cruel and confident. Then hoofbeats, fast and hard, cutting through the night. A rider burst from the storm like an avenging ghost. Jackson. Dawn broke cold and clear. The cabin smoldered, flames eating through the unfinished roof. Mercer and his 4 hired guns stood in a loose circle, torches still burning. Then Jackson emerged from the smoke on horseback. He didn't draw his gun. He didn't shout. He simply rode between the fire and the tree line where his family hid, placing his body as a wall. "That's far enough," Jackson said quietly. Mercer sneered. "You got no stake here, cowboy. This land's mine." "Wrong. This land belongs to the woman you've been trying to destroy, and those boys you've been terrorizing." Jackson dismounted slowly. "I'm done letting men like you win." One of the hired guns reached for his pistol. Jackson moved faster, disarming him with a twist, sending the gun skittering into snow. The other men tensed but didn't draw. They'd underestimated this quiet cowboy. That mistake was becoming clear. "I've got witnesses coming," Jackson said. "Sent word to the neighboring ranchers last night. They know about your bribes. Mercer, your schemes, how you've been stealing land and calling it legal." Mercer's confidence flickered. "You're bluffing." Hoofbeats answered him. 6 riders crested the ridge ranchers from the surrounding territory, men who'd grown tired of Mercer's methods. The sheriff trailed behind, looking pale and trapped. Jackson turned to the sheriff. "You gonna do your job now or keep letting this man run your town?" The sheriff swallowed hard. Legal consequences or moral ones either way. He was finished protecting Mercer. Jackson walked to Mercer, his voice steel. "This land is hers. These boys are under my protection. You touch them, you answer to me. We clear." Mercer's jaw worked. But surrounded, outnumbered, and exposed, he had no moves left. Then Jackson turned toward the tree line. Sarah emerged first. Boys clustered around her, all 4 staring at the man who'd come back. Jackson removed his hat. He looked at Sarah, at Daniel, at Ben, at Timmy, at the family he'd run from because he was afraid of failing again. "I'm sorry I left," he said, voice carrying to everyone. "I was scared. Scared I couldn't protect you. Scared I'd lose you like I lost them." He swallowed hard. "But leaving was the real failure. And I won't do it again." He met Sarah's eyes. "We're home now." Then he looked at each boy in turn. All accepted. Not a proposal, a covenant, before God and witnesses. He was claiming them as his. Timmy broke first. Running through the snow, he hit Jackson's legs hard, wrapping around them. Ben followed. Then even Daniel, the boy who'd learned not to trust, let himself be pulled into the embrace. Sarah came last, tears streaming. Jackson's arm opened for her, and she stepped into it. Into him. Into the shelter she'd been building all along. The neighboring ranchers helped extinguish the flames. Mercer was led away, his empire of lies crumbling. The sheriff muttered apologies no one cared about. By afternoon, the cabin still stood damaged, but salvageable. The door hung crooked, but it would hold. Jackson looked at the structure, then at Sarah. "We'll rebuild it. Stronger this time." She smiled through tears. "Yes, we will. 3 months can heal what 3 years couldn't." Early March brought the thaw ice melting, rivers running, wildflowers pushing through the last patches of snow. The cabin stood complete now, solid and expanded. A garden plot lay ready for planting, chickens pecked in a fenced yard. The rope swing swayed gently in the breeze. Inside, Sarah hummed while cooking a sound Jackson realized he'd never heard before. It filled the spaces in his heart he'd thought would stay empty forever. Daniel was taller, stronger,